Welcome everyone, this is the Bridge program, and today we chat with Dr. Viljoen, a life coach and a medical doctor from London. He's a good friend of mine and we've known each other for over 20 years. We chat about our emotional responses in this time. We speak about the fight, flight versus freeze response and how we can see that playing out in our lives. Also, the stages of acceptance, denial, anger, bargaining, and how I can see that every time I look back at the first week of the lockdown and even today, how I'm literally still going through these stages. We speak about things like, why am I less productive when I have more time? How do I find a sense of job satisfaction even though I can't work in people's mouths and I'm not a dentist? What are the little things that I can use in my life to find a sense of normalcy? And what are the practical tools? Getting a sense from people, finding some comfort and some stability in routine, dealing with addictive cycles in our lives, dealing with cravings. How can we, on a very personal basis, deal with this crisis? Please like our Facebook page on Bridge Program or in Implant and Aesthetic Academy. Follow us on YouTube, on all our social platforms. And this is one of the more personal videos. I hope that you enjoy it. Everyone. Hello, Albert. We have Albert Viljoen here with us all the way from London in the UK. Albert is a good friend of mine. And we've known each other for about, I have to really think about it now, but very long time, almost 20 years probably.
Probably close to 20.
Close to 20, yes. Not to give away our age, but yes, we've been friends. We studied together in Pretoria. And Albert is currently in the UK. He's a coach and he's also a doctor. And he's a good friend of mine. So I thought it would be nice to just chat about how Albert as a coach and as a friend can maybe give me some advice as to how to navigate through this crisis that we're facing. Albert, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for this time, Corne. I do think it's a strange time to be alive, and what I've noticed certainly from my coaching practice is that there's a demand, a big demand for coaching, but in a very different format, very much kind of crisis-driven format, where coaching tends to focus more on performance. So my background, just for people listening, so I studied medicine, worked as a GP for about 5 years. You and I attempted working together for a while in an integrative form. And then from there, I found coaching as a modality that I felt works better for the way I like to work, that shifts the emphasis from me bringing cures or bringing some solutions like a doctor would, more into collaborating with the client around solutions they can actually implement themselves. And a big driver for that was the fact that I've noticed a lot of people come with health issues that are actually related to decisions they make in life, to old habits that they struggle to break. And I felt like if I can help them assess and navigate that better, the long-term impact in terms of their general well-being would improve. So I kind of repositioned myself, I think, in the health ecosystem from being in the front line where the GPs, especially now, operate, moving more into the lifestyle space where GPs often struggle to make an impact because they only see people for a few minutes at a time when they actually have symptoms. So that's a bit of my background in the coaching space. Is there anything else you think I need to say, or you?
No, I think that's a very informative. Well, I think maybe introducing you, yes, as a coach and giving that background info is really helpful. But I think I can add to that, and the fact that you understand medicine and you understand also private practice, because we were both. I think it was about a year that you worked with me. So you understand what it's like to run your own business as well. So you've got some insight as to the financial implications of where we are, the practical stuff. And and then obviously a medical background. So I think that's very
Mm.
helpful for where we are now. And you know, us dentists, nerds, we always want to get the pedigree, and we want to know that the people that we're chatting to are legit.
Of
So
course, yeah, and with
yes,
good reason.
with yes, but it's nice to talk about where we are now,
Mm.
and I think just to frame it a bit, as a dentist, I'm facing a lot of crises at the moment. So it's not only the financial stuff that's really worrying me. It's also, how do you position yourself as a healthcare professional in this time? Do you just isolate yourself and pull back and pretend that we are not sort of in the front line? Because we're dentists. I saw a really
Yeah.
cool photo the other day of a guy sort of lying, having a cigarette, watching the world just go down.
Mm.
And they said that this is the way that the dentists are looking at the situation. So all the other healthcare professionals are fighting in the front line, and we're just sort of watching it from a distance, which is not fair, because I really feel that I can include myself as someone that's actively involved in trying to help. Um,
Yeah.
so if that's the framework that we're talking about, we're trying to help, we're trying to be useful, we're trying because we really care about people and we care about our
Mm.
profession. How do we approach this? Is it normal to want to draw back? Is it normal to want to overreact?
Mm.
Those are all the questions that I'm asking myself. And when you and I spoke a little bit before the meeting, we discussed the grief framework, which
Mm.
helps me to make sense of all the different emotions that I'm feeling at the moment. So if you want to maybe just elaborate a little bit on
Mm.
that, I can't even remember all the stages, but that just helped me to make sense of it.
Yeah. I think it's a good thing to reach for models at this stage. The grief framework is one I definitely would. I think that'll be a good one for our discussion. I also often refer to people's response to trauma, the fight or flight versus the freeze response, which we oscillate through, and that
Oh
might be a good
yeah.
place to start. So, and you'll notice it from social media, and that image that you mentioned is a good example of withdrawal. So they talk about the 5 stages, but they don't really happen within that framework, as in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Unfortunately, we don't, as humans, operate that linearly. We're quite complex. So you tend
Yes.
to cycle through different ones. So I've got them written down just to remember. So the one is denial, there's anger, there's bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So acceptance is the kind of culmination of the first 4 aspects, the first 4 stages, or I would even say the first 4 elements. So you
Mm-hmm.
can move from anger to depression, back to anger. The shock. So after the initial shock, when all of this happens, that's what I would say is usually when our fight or flight or freeze response kicks in. So generally what you'd see is a lot of chaos of doing a lot, but not
Mm-hmm.
very thoughtfully doing things,
Mm-hmm.
like trying to get clients or to, fix your practice so that you don't lose patients, or going into overdrive, versus, binging on Netflix. And
Mm-hmm.
those two same responses can happen in the course of 24 hours as a way to cope with a very destabilizing new landscape.
Yeah. And
So
do you
that's kind
think
of
it's normal to do that? I mean, should we
that's
allow
a hun-
ourselves to go into that?
something that I remember from my studies, and this stays with me to this day, is normal people respond abnormally to abnormal situations. And it's been
Okay.
really useful as a reminder that when you find yourself much more aggressive, much less productive, much more emotional than you usually are, that's quite natural, because your system, your psychological system and physiological system, is in shock. It needs to find a new equilibrium, and while it finds that equilibrium, it's a bit of a pendulum of what do I do now? And it's new for everyone. This isn't something, even if you've worked in the government sector in South Africa, which is quite high stress and is more challenging than in the UK in terms of the kind of patients you see and the kind of trauma you might see when you're training. This scale of pandemic is new to all of us. So it's very natural. And this is probably what I find myself saying to most clients is, it's fine. It's fine if you're in overdrive, and it's fine if you're not.
Mm-hmm.
The way to work with that is to notice that that is a response, and not become hard on yourself for acting in a way that you don't normally do. Because that's what we do, is like, why am I doing this? You find yourself just in a mode, in some mode, whether it's 3 beers later, or whether it's 5 podcasts later, because you're trying to make a difference.
Exactly.
Without thinking about it. It is ways in which we're finding our new stability in a moving target. Because at the moment, it's a bit like being on a ship in a storm. It's not like you can find solid ground. You have to constantly rebalance.
Yeah.
So that's the first invitation I usually bring to people, is when that happens, just, take a deep breath and allow yourself to be with that response in a less self-judging way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Someone used the analogy that we are.
I think that's kind of that. Is that something that you've noticed in yourself?
Sorry, I lost you there for a second. What did you ask?
No, I just asked, have you noticed this for yourself?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I have I'm quite self-aware at points, so I don't always notice it when I'm doing it, but when I start thinking about my day, or when I start planning my day, and I realize it's complete chaos. I mean, at first I was in overdrive, trying to prepare for the end of the world. Then I was very sad, because I came to the realization that a lot of people will die, and that a lot of people will suffer through this. And then I got to a place where I tried just being sort of meditative and in the moment and at peace. And then I started doing stuff again. And I can honestly say, for the past week, so this is our week 1 of lockdown. Just to give context, it's the 4th of April. I should have said that in the beginning. So it's the 4th of April, and we went into lockdown on a Thursday, and it is now a Saturday. So we're in our second week, and the first week for me was completely frantic. I didn't really sleep. I was working like a crazy person, trying to figure out how I might be able to save my business when this is all over. Also to just keep some sanity in what I can do at the moment to help myself, to help my colleagues. So no, I mean, I was all over the place, and the way that it's making sense to me now, looking back at the week that's passed, is to say that someone used the analogy, when the orthodontist that works with us, she used this, and she said, we're flying the plane, we are building the plane while we're flying it.
While we're flying, yeah.
and it actually gives you some sense of relief when you think of it like that, because I know that what I'm doing is not necessarily the correct response, but I know that it is the response I need to have. And then to allow myself a little bit of space to spiral, and to know that I'm spiraling, and to also allow people in my life. So I often speak to Jean, my business partner, who knows me quite well. So he then brings a little bit of like sanity into the conversation, and like, okay, let's just think about this clearly. It's not all going to end. Let's just, and you need people like that. So I would speak to Lenta, and I would speak to other friends, and in doing so, I believe that in that frantic state, we can still have moments of clarity. And I think people help us with that.
Yeah, it's very important, and you're pointing to some resources. So the first thing, I'm just you mentioned that it might not be the correct response. I would even go further and say, like, every response at this stage is the correct response, in the sense that most of your responses are not in your control. Even when you think you're taking control in a crisis, what we tend to do is take over control. We try to control the entire pandemic by doing certain frantic actions that seem sensible and have value. It's not that they are, without value. You definitely did a lot of work this week, but you also probably spent your energy stressing and doing frantic work, not just considerate work. And it's not possible to do considerate work when there's a fire. You just kind of put out the fire wherever you see it.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that. And I think that's a very useful point, is the first one, and this is, we often bring it up in these conversations, is support. And this is probably why things like Zoom calls and WhatsApp calls and, people just being more in contact with other people is, one, a response to the isolation or the feeling of isolation and being stuck. And the other one is the one way in which we regulate our own nervous system, which is what drives this kind of erratic behavior, is when someone else is in a more stable place. So when I talk to my partner, when I'm in an unstable place and he's in a more comfortable place, and he, has a sense of, it's fine, we'll get through this. Just that response and his sense of calm starts regulating my own state. So
right.
Finding those people like you have with Jean and Lenta and friends, who, and it will be different. On the next day, you'll feel a bit more stable, and one of your friends will feel more unstable.
That's right.
Which is why we need to have that sense of checking in with each other, not just in terms of the practicalities, because a lot of the practicalities are out of our control. But a big part of it is around, how am I feeling about what's going on? And the fact that I'm feeling a bit out of control is okay. And the fact that someone else is okay then calms my nervous system down. So that's kind of a way of rebalancing, especially in that frantic stage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I listened to a podcast from Brene, which I'm a big fan of. And she mentioned also that, this is a first. So she was hosting her first podcast right when this all happened. And she used a very descriptive way. It's a FF. So she used a different word for the F.
Okay.
But the point is that she used this analogy of going through first in our lives. And she told a couple of stories. But the point that I wanted to try and make is, if you go through a first, the chances of you getting it right or knowing what to do is zero.
Yeah.
And the only way you can help yourself or guide yourself through a first is to firstly know that it is a first.
Yeah.
And to know that it's not going to be easy and things are going to be completely out of control. And to just sit with that in the beginning, and then to try and normalize the situation, to see how can we bring normality to what we're going through. And the way that I've been doing it is to just try and normalize my day. So the stuff that I can have control over, so washing the dishes in the morning, making coffee, having a little bit of a routine. Because even though I would want to believe I'm a bit of a rebel and I don't like routine, I actually really like routine.
Yeah.
And that's helped me to take a moment to almost go through the motion of making coffee and washing the dishes and cleaning the house every day. And it's become a bit of a meditation for me, which I think those little things that we still have control over and that we still can do in our daily lives might help us to stay sane.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is when there's the response, which is very driven by your nervous system, the denial, aggression, whatever it is in that moment. And then there's potential ways to stabilize that. It's not about not being depressed or not being frantic, but it's finding a way to say, okay, this is what's happening for me. What can best support me in this? And this might be a good way of framing it. It's not about fixing the situation. It's about finding the best form of support for where you are right now, which might be very different in an hour's time after you've read a news article, or in 2 hours when you suddenly start thinking about your business, your finance. So there is definitely that. So the one thing is definitely rituals and routine. It's been interesting because some of my clients who are, there's one exec of a company that, in many ways, when you're functioning at this high level, you've got a degree, you've got a sense of, how to run a business. It's even harder for you to feel out of control because it's not a place you're familiar with.
Yeah.
What I've noticed myself telling these clients is, something like making coffee or getting up on time is an achievement in this context. When you're in the middle of a war, you're not expected to make an income. You're expected to not die. Not dying becomes an achievement. So lowering the bar of what what you would value as a successful day isn't just a way of making yourself feel better. It's appropriate, because a successful day now isn't having a full patient list that are all happy with their treatments. A successful day now is getting through it in a reasonably sane way and having some sense of stability. So ritual, routine, and treating the things you achieve in the day as achievements, as, okay, I've done this. On the one end, it gives you a sense of normality, as you've mentioned. On the other hand, it also helps you contain your world. So
I've lost him now.
Time.
Sorry, Albert. I lost the last 30 seconds there.
Cool. No worries. Where did you lose me?
Probably. I'm not sure, actually.
We're all going through cycles, including the internet. I think you're frozen again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah, I said, like, the way that we treat it is what is supportive for this moment in time. And rituals, routine helps. Making things more smaller and contained helps. Treating small achievements as big achievements. It's not a way of making yourself feel better. It's a way of actually responding appropriately to an out of control situation.
Okay, so if I can translate it in a way that makes sense in my life at the moment, where I would always get a sense of achievement by doing a big case, or I would feel like I've been productive when I have a full day, or when I'm making money, or when I'm helping people, or those are the things that make me feel good. Dentist. We can frame it differently now. And we can say that I can still have a sense of achievement when I spend an hour on looking at the finances and having maybe a conversation with the accountant. That is still an achievement. And that is still on building on something. So it's not just frantically being busy and trying to keep everything together. It's actually constructive, and we should honor those achievements.
Exactly. And I'm glad you said it. We should honor it, because what we tend to initially, psychologically, it's hard to adapt to that, because you have a certain standard you still want to reach, and by all means we still want to get there. I would say it's inappropriate to have those standards now. It's not just that you can now just treat an accountant meeting as an achievement. It is an achievement in the new context, just like you don't treat a patient who is in an acute stage the same as in a patient who has recovered. There's a very different response to the way you work with them and the expectations that's on the patient. Same for us. We're in the acute stage of the world pandemic, which means the expectations on us are a lot more concrete, a lot more contained, and a lot more day-to-day, survival-based. What I think we find challenging is because we're not in the middle of the war as such. So we're not necessarily in the ER or the A&E, whatever you call it in the country you're in. Because you're not there working with people that are ill, we have this dissonance in our mind, because we're at home, life seems the same, but everything's different. So that's why I find myself reminding myself and clients, it's not normal anymore, because you're not in the comfort of your home. You are in isolation. So that means that your requirements of yourself should be different to get through the next phase.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what we're doing at the moment in the practice is we are only allowed to see emergencies. So just to give you some context as to the practical stuff of what we deal with as dentists. So we are not allowed to do any elective procedures. So it's like sepsis, pain, bleeding, basicking. So what John and I did is we divided into two groups. So I'm the one team, and he's doing Fridays, and I'm doing Tuesdays. And then we have one staff member helping us. And we're using the rooms in the practice to try and put patients in separate rooms so that we don't have to clean every time in between. And we've got a whole protocol set up, which probably took us like 3 days just to set up this whole process of patient having an inquiry. How do they get hold of us? We have a centralized system that filters, and then we have phone calls with our patients, and practical stuff like the patient has to sit in their car before they come in. And then we have full PPE. So we've got masks and visors and gowns and the whole works. So does our assistant. But this whole process was extremely exhausting to set up. And the frustrating thing for me now is it's not about this volhoubaar.
Not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
Not sustainable.
So I saw two patients on Tuesday. I think Jean saw 5 patients yesterday. And I could hear when I spoke to him, he was completely tired and not even able to explain what his day was like. It's not sustainable to do this, to have all of these PPE protocols and infection control and sterilization stuff. So we've probably gone completely, into an extreme, but that's what we're following guidelines set out to us by other countries. Now you're trying to do the right thing, but after you've done it, you realize it's not the right thing. It's not sustainable. There's no ways we can do our work like this. So I think that's where we as dentists are facing such a it's like a split in the road. Will dentistry change forever, or are we going to adapt and realize that we've always been exposed to viruses, we've always been exposed to germs, and are we going to go back to the old way of doing stuff? It's that's really tricky for me at the moment to go through that process.
Absolutely. I mean, and what comes up for me when you talk about that, there's the world that's new for the world. So even the guidelines we're getting from people who in some ways are doing this for the first time. By all means, there's experts in the field, but a global pandemic hasn't happened in a recent enough time for us to say, oh, we remember this. This is what we did before. This is the first run. So guidelines are, and generally guidelines tend to push into the extreme of safety. So it would set up safety, excessive safety, because of the unknowns, the unknown risk elements. And at the same time, it's not sustainable. The other reason why we get tired or we get more, it's hard to adapt to this, is it's new. You're including so much mental work above and beyond your actual just work with the patient to make sure you're ticking the boxes. It's like the first time when you did your first cases ever, you're spent at the end of the day because your brain is actually rewiring to a whole new routine. Your habits that have just been running like a primary operating system aren't accessible anymore. You're learning a new skill, applying the new skill, and still doing your daily work. You would be tired. So in some ways that will probably settle down if, depending on how long this lockdown lasts, you will find your groove just like you did before when you started doing dentistry. And potentially the measures will change over time depending on the changing tides, which is all the time as well.
And I think I'm trying to remind myself to have grace with the decisions I'm making and to know that I might be making mistakes, but I really believe that I'm doing the best I can. And I think everyone is. I don't think that anyone at the moment is going to maliciously try and infect people. You know what I mean? Exactly. So as dentists, we've been in contact with a lot of the sort of, how crazy WhatsApp groups can get at a time like this. So all the WhatsApp groups are completely crazy, and Facebook and social media, and everyone wants to give their input and say what they feel is the right thing to do. And it's changing by the hour in any case. But it's so important to just know that we will make mistakes and that our colleagues will make mistakes, and that this is not the time to criticize and to judge people. I think it's probably, it's such a fragile, we're all in such a fragile state. I had the experience, which was I am quite sensitive, we know that, but I was surprised by my reaction with this. I put a profile photo of my on Facebook with my visor and my 3 masks and everything. And someone made a comment to say that, oh, but your neck is still exposed. And now you're going to go home and you're going to give your loved one, you're going to infect your loved ones.
Mm.
And I mean, really? I was just like, sure, okay. And then, my response was just that, no, I will. Well, I actually got home and I took a shower because, I mean, I had a different set of clothes on, etc., etc., and I had a gown on, but now my neck was exposed, and then someone thought it was appropriate to point that out. You know what I mean?
Well, and absolutely, and on that, so it's so part of it's the actual things that are happening, right? So we see that we're doing the things, we're putting the masks on, we're trying to wash our hands, we're doing what we think on the externals, right?
Yes.
And we're very conscious of the external because that's where the threat lives. What we're not that conscious of is how our system is what state my system is in at that time. For instance, that sounds like a very typical, you're being protective and you're taking the measures necessary. The other person is aware of the threat, so they're just scanning for danger. Exposed neck, that's a danger. And then the response might not be very appropriate. And if you want to use the grief model, kind of anger or pushing against, bargaining, it's like, no, you should do this, you should do that. That's where people get very critical, because it's a way of pushing against the threat. It's a way of, well, you're going to do something wrong and you're going to kill people. It's not necessarily rational. It's also emotional, and also it's appropriate because they're also under threat. When we feel less threatened, it's easier for us to be, like your conversation with Jean, to be a little bit more rational and sensible within a context of firefighting. It's like, if you go back to the ABCs, the first is always hazards and calming everyone down. It's get the threat out of the way, get your system under a sense of calm, so that your frontal lobe isn't switched off, so that you can think rationally. So even if your neck is exposed, you'll have a way to deal with it, rather than being hyperreactive and accusatory, which is what people get. Absolutely.
Yeah. What are those 3 H's? It was hazards and help.
Hazards, help, and
something else.
I can't remember. It's been a while.
But I mean, all of these tools that, the trauma response, the grief, the cycle that we go through, there's so many things that we can apply to what we're going through at the moment.
Absolutely.
We're literally living through a trauma event. And I think it's so helpful what you said. Staying alive is actually an accomplishment at the moment. And getting up and making coffee, cleaning your house, and have some sense of normalcy is an accomplishment.
Not killing your spouse is an accomplishment.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, and in some ways we can laugh about it. In some ways, domestic violence has risen in Italy because of the fact that people are stuck in their homes. So being aware that, and I think that's been an interesting and very challenging adaptation for those of us who tend to be in positions of power and in positions where we have to have more responsibility. So doctors, CEOs, managers, people who assume more responsibility, find this context especially challenging because we're not used to being part of the challenge with someone else. We feel like we should have it together more than the people around us. That's what we're used to. So another reminder is we are all in the same boat. Even if you have more expertise and knowledge and whatever else, at this stage, you're under the firing line as much as your patients are, which is why it's important for you to give yourself a little bit more grace, as you mentioned, than you would when you're in a stable place, when you have more resources, when everything is, kind of ticking over as usual, and giving yourself that leeway. The thing that I've found myself telling a lot of people on these calls is this is the time to make mistakes and experiment, because there's going to be so much less judgment in the air, because all of us are making so many mistakes. There's Zoom calls where people forget their cameras on and they go to the toilet. I've seen this online. And so there's this kind of exposure. You can see my house when you call me. There's that very kind of intruded space, we're all in each other's space. And in some ways, it's also an invitation for us all to be a little bit more human and have a little bit more room for error.
That's right.
Because that's the only way we can move forward, is to acknowledge the reality, the new reality we're in.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And when you were talking about, you know, the way that this can affect our lives really badly, and people that are in situations where they are exposed to domestic violence. I'm thinking of people that that are in abusive cycles and in their homes, and also people that used to find safety and comfort at school, kids that were safer at school. Sorry, we lost each other there. Kids that were safer at school than what they were at their houses. So there's so much of that going on as well. Albert, are you still there? There we go. But is there ways that you think...
Erratic signal. Keep going.
Yeah, we are getting a very erratic signal. I think that's a little bit better now. I tend to go into cycles of I was a smoker for a very long time. We are losing each other. Shall we just turn the video off for a while?
We can,
Hello?
yeah.
Okay.
See if that's better.
Yeah. Stop video. So when, as an ex-smoker, and as someone that tends to go into just in extremes, I mean, I'm so grateful for the fact that we're not allowed to buy cigarettes at this stage, because, geez, I've never been as tempted to to buy cigarettes again. But you know, when I go through motions during my day, and maybe you can help me with some coping mechanisms that we can all use in when we are more prone to doing these things, which is harmful to ourselves. More harmful now than ever. But how do we cope with those cravings when we are isolated in our houses? You know.
Yeah, it's a good question. Sometimes we don't. It's as simple as that. So I would say the one thing is your attitude around these unhelpful coping mechanisms, and it's useful to frame it as a coping mechanism rather than a bad habit. It is a way in which we cope. It's a way in which we soothe ourselves, our nervous system, and our sense of threat or anxiety.
Yeah.
So one, when you do it, you did it fine. I saw this, I think was it on Twitter or somewhere, where someone says, day 1 of quarantine, meditate and exercise. Day 4, pause, ice cream over pasta. And that's very natural. It's the thing of, you go into this overdrive of wanting to do things, and then suddenly you find yourself binge eating because you're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So cutting yourself slack when you do that is the first thing. The second one is, most of these behaviors are ways to soothe ourselves emotionally. So kind of basic kind of tips that I usually give people is, one, limit your exposure to the news. Most of the news we face is noise. Most of it is not constructive. I mean, we've been in lockdown, I think, for 3 weeks now, 2-3 weeks already.
Yeah.
And I've literally, the only things that have changed have been the degree to the numbers, which don't help me, because what am I going to do with the numbers?
Yeah.
And a repetitive message from the government to stay at home. The message is the same: stay at home, wash your hands. Stay at home, wash your hands. So what you can do about the news isn't that much different, which is why I would say limit your exposure to the news, because most of the time it's just a way to feed our curiosity and to try and make ourselves feel better, but it doesn't. What I often tell people is, be very explicit with how you limit yourself. Don't just say, I'm going to watch less news. Be explicit and say, turn off your news feed, or give yourself half an hour a day to catch up on a reliable channel. Like, make a very explicit commitment on, how am I getting my information and where? The second one is what we've spoken about earlier, is your routine, setting up a routine of sorts, and be experimental. Yeah, you can try for a few days to say, okay, first thing in the morning, I'm going to run, then I'm going to do admin, then I'm going to clean my house, whatever it is you do. But having a schedule really helps you feel more in control. feel more accomplished, and
Yeah.
it takes your mind off wandering into the unknown future. So that's the other way to get a sense of control. So for instance, if when you mentioned you have cravings, the cravings are probably a response to the stress and the fears of the future. So just doing tasks, daily tasks, ticking things off might help you feel a little bit less stressed, and having a sense of routine and control in that space.
Yeah,
That's the
that
second
makes
one.
sense.
The third one would be around connection, and some of us are trapped with people we don't want to be with, which is possible, or people who we love and then sometimes wonder why we love them because they're in our face all the time. So I would
Yeah.
also say that one, make contact with people that feel like they support you. So and it might be friends, it might be family, it might be, it might be anyone. It doesn't have to be someone specific, but the framing is someone who makes you feel a little bit more grounded and settled. It can be anyone. And also create space. So on the one hand, connect. On the other hand, switch off from connecting, because WhatsApp messages and being with someone in the same space can be overwhelming. So sometimes you need to just have a downtime.
Yeah.
Things that we would normally do pretty unconsciously because it was part of our routine, now we have to be more explicit about, which is why I'm
Yeah.
talking about setting schedules, telling your partner, I'm going to take an hour just to be outside, by myself. Those kind of requests are absolutely reasonable in this time, and being very clear around that with each other.
Yeah.
Those three things,
Yeah,
I
that
think those
makes
are the main
sense.
ones. Oh, and then there's just the kind of basic self-management or self-regulation practices. So there's two breathing practices that I always bring in, generally in terms of managing people's emotional state. So the one is called box breathing, and the format is basically inhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath on exhale for 4 seconds. By slowing down your breathing, you're switching, I always forget which is which, parasympathetic to sympathetic, or other way around. Anyway, you're calming down your nervous system, and you do that on a few cycles. You can do it at any moment in time. I would say if you do it regularly, that'll be great.
Yeah.
The other breathing practice is what we call coherence breathing. So you put your hand on your heart just as a way to signal kind of to your brain where you're breathing to, and then you're breathing towards where you feel your heart. 4 seconds in, 5 seconds out, or 5 seconds in, 6 seconds out. The emphasis is on having a longer exhale than an inhale, a controlled breathing practice. And the effect of that is that it helps increase your heart rate variability, which studies have shown, and that's kind of been one of the latest buzzwords. If you increase your heart rate variability, it decreases your overall sense of stress,
Okay.
which improves your well-being.
Well, sure. Yeah, I think those are very useful tools that you've just mentioned. Connection, and I mean basic breathing, and also
Yeah,
just being very mindful of how you structure your day. I think
yeah,
it's
yeah,
extremely useful what you said about the fact that we normally went to work and we went home and we went to gym and we went for a
yeah,
walk on the beach. Now we have to plan that.
yeah,
Sometimes we'll be together, sometimes we'll be alone, sometimes we'll be active, sometimes we won't.
yeah.
So to look at your day in that way, and to be mindful of how you spend every hour. And
Mm,
also I think it's very helpful, that we have coaches, we have people
mm,
like you that are more accessible now because we've got more time.
yeah,
um I don't know about you, but I've used the excuse, or maybe it's an excuse, maybe it's not, but the fact that I didn't have time for stuff was,
mm,
well, yeah, it's always been an obstacle for me. But now I have time.
mm,
So I have time for check-ins with my family. I
mm,
speak to my family more often because I have more time. We can have conversations like these with each other, and there, I want to, if you want to maybe just elaborate on your role as a coach, and how you see your coaching practice in this time.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting. A lot of coaches now, especially in the first time now, when you talk about frantic response and you were, kind of doing everything you can in that first week, coaches had a similar, I've noticed in our
Yeah.
field, where everyone's like, oh, this is opportunity. Everyone's going to be stuck with themselves. They can do personal work. And in reality, though, coaching at this stage isn't really focusing on being your best self because we're in a crisis. It is more around survival strategies. So even though we have more time to write our memoirs or do our PhD or whatever, a lot of us are going to find it harder to do than when we didn't have time, simply because we're in a state of crisis. So that might be the first thing that I would make people aware of. Is what I've noticed in my practice is I've moved in, even in conversations with performance coaching, especially in the business context, has now become, did you get up today? Did you brush your teeth? Did you, have you allowed yourself to feel proud of a few things? Did you make contact with your parents?
Yeah.
My coaching has moved from the benchmark has shifted. And it's quite a useful position for me to have at the moment, because most of us don't do this day to day. We don't know how to navigate these challenging times. So having someone like a coach or a therapist that you can just reflect with and check in with is incredibly useful at this time. It's another way of rallying support and getting some perspective. Even though we're all going through the same things, the ways in which we find support might be a little bit nuanced. I've noticed, for instance, people who have kids are a little bit more used to setting up routines at home.
Yeah.
And they will have schedules for the kids and for themselves. And so there's a sense in which some of them are a bit better resourced with certain tools than someone who's never done this before.
Yeah.
So having a coach or a therapist or someone who can give you just a little bit of reflection, objective reflection on, this is what I'm hearing, this is what I think you need to do now, and this might be supportive, is incredibly useful at this point in time. Bearing in mind, it's not to achieve to become your next best self, but it is more around getting through this in a sane enough way, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way of also summarizing it. What I want to take home from what you've just said now, just to end off the conversation, it makes so much sense to realize that every response is the right response at the moment. That there's no incorrect responses, and that this is the first time that we are going through this. So we have to be more gracious with ourselves. Also, what you just said now makes a lot of sense to me, and I will definitely apply that, is to realize that the fact that we have more time doesn't mean that we will be more productive. We will probably be less productive because we are surviving a war. So the main aim at the moment is survival, and putting out fires and being frantic is normal in a crisis time, and not being in a place of self-actualization and right there on the top of Maslow. This is not where we are now. We're not functioning there. We are right at the bottom. We are surviving. And then it makes it easier to give context to the way that we act. If we judge ourselves too harshly for being in a frantic state, or being depressed, or being sad, or being angry, it actually just makes the situation worse. So being with our emotions is probably also a very good place just to start to be with ourselves, and being with all those thoughts and emotions and feelings. And then I'm going to also practice the breathing that you suggested. I think that's a very nice, it's such a small thing that we can do.
It's really powerful.
It is very powerful. To
on
do
that
the
note,
little things.
On that note, the two kind of foundation practices we usually give clients is, the one is journaling. So it's basically just kind of reflecting on what's going on for you. That's a useful way to slow yourself down and create space to get things out of your head. There's no rules around journaling. It's just picking up a piece of paper and writing whatever comes up. And it might be, I have a piece of paper in front of me, I don't know what to write. That might be the first sentence.
Yeah.
But when you do that, it's a really helpful way to slow your mind down and to give your thoughts a bit of structure. And the other foundational practice is meditation. And it's not about becoming a Zen master in some esoteric cult.
Yeah.
There's an app that I've recently downloaded. It's called Balance, and they have an annual free subscription because of this crisis. And I found it quite useful and practical. And it's just a way for someone to talk you through breathing and regulating your nervous system. That's how you can view meditation. It's another form of how do I slow down and calm myself down when everything is frantic. So that's also something to try out. And the big thing is try anything. This is our time to experiment. There's no judgment. Try arts and craft, fail at arts and craft, try dieting, try eating ice cream. Like whatever it is in this time that you can do, there is actually a lot less pressure around getting it right. So there's an opportunity to give things a go that you haven't done before.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks so much for the conversation, Albert. It was really helpful and very useful for me as well. And whenever you and I chat, there's always a sense of calm that you bring to a situation, and I really want to honor you for that. Thank you for being a good friend and also for being a very wise coach. I'm going to switch on the video when we're done now, but just in closing, will you also just is it okay if I make available your contact details so that people can get in touch with you? What is the best way?
Yeah, definitely. So they can go to the website. My website is www.originalintent.co.uk. And I've reserved a few slots in my schedule for April, specifically around COVID, just support, that'll be free. So if someone just wants to have a call to, one, see what coaching is like, or, kind of vent where they're at, they can also find that on the website. And if you have show notes, we'll add some details in the show notes as well.
Perfect. Thanks, my friend.
Thanks, Corne. It was lovely to chat again.
Cool. Bye.
Cool.